It's a good Wednesday in the week, and I just want to us to think about one verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. If you'd take a look there, 2 Corinthians 4. You shut that door for me. 2 Corinthians 4, one verse, toward the end of the chapter, Paul says this: "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." So let's let that sink in for these few minutes. Our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Remember to ask questions at the end. If you have one, please raise your hand, or a comment or a testimony. Our light affliction, Paul calls them light, and if he categorizes his as light, where do ours fall? Less than light, lighter than light, or light? Some of us are in harder afflictions than others. So think about today, what is yours right now this week? Maybe since the virus started, maybe long before that. What have you been going through that is a regular affliction, a challenge, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, physically, relationally, spiritually? The battles, the afflictions. That could be sickness, stress, chronic pain, relationships broken, or you just internally feel like you're in great need. Everybody sees outwardly that you seem to be stable, doing well. Internally, the ship's being tossed. So what are your afflictions? Name one to yourself, or name a couple. The theme of 2 Corinthians, the whole book, could be the glories and trials of the Christian life, the glories and trials of church life, or the glories and trials of the gospel ministry. Because Paul addresses that aspect right here in chapter 4. Truly, 2 Corinthians is a very underappreciated book. It takes a back seat to 1 Corinthians in many ways. People could tell you mainly what 1 Corinthians is about, but if you ask them, hey, what's 2 Corinthians about? You might not be able to answer. Well, that's the answer. It's the glories and the trials of the Christian life and of the gospel ministry. Now, chapter 4, Paul focuses in on this, and he's talking about, very transparently, by the way, the trials of doing gospel ministry as an earthen vessel, as a jar of clay. That's all we are. That's all we'll ever be until we're glorified in heaven. We have this treasure, the gospel, in this earthen jar, this earthen vessel of clay, which reminds us we are a jar of clay, imperfect, marred. So is Paul. We are affectable, meaning things affect us. We are impactable, meaning when things happen to us, it impacts us. Paul describes how here, in his bearing the treasure of the gospel, in his humanity as an apostle, he uses these descriptive phrases. We're hard pressed on every side. We're persecuted. We're perplexed. We're struck down. We're always being delivered unto death. Paul was always facing death. He knew the next town he went to, he could be stoned. He could be locked up in prison. he could be beaten, he could be martyred. And he says, therefore, death is always at work in us. Death to his own life being extended, death to his reputation, death to his dignity. He said, we're the offscouring of the earth, we apostles. Death to his image. And always, he said, always dying daily. So the gospel ministry and the living of the Christian life does these things to us. It's occupational hazard, these afflictions. Afflictions for us all. So I want us to focus on verse 17 here. Paul says concerning our afflictions, 3 major truths. And if we ever needed to memorize a verse and view our afflictions through the lens of Scripture, this is it, because Paul tells us 3 big things about our afflictions. First of all, he says they're light. He calls them light. These light afflictions. Not light as opposed to darkness, not clarity or brightness, no. But light contrasted with unbearable, too heavy. Light afflictions means light in weight. It's the same word Jesus uses in Matthew 11 when he says, my burden is light. That means it's manageable. It's bearable. It means God's saying to us, you can make it through this. It means we can say to others tenderly, lovingly, you're going to make it. This is doable. Now this means we can never say or believe, this is just too much. I'm done. I'm quitting. I can't take it anymore. And God has put too much on me. This verse eliminates that perception and that excuse. The light afflictions, whatever they are, they're bearable by God's grace, because he has said, my grace is what? Sufficient for you. Our light afflictions, we don't feel like they're light often. We do feel psychologically, emotionally, even sometimes physically, I just can't take this anymore. This is too much. But Paul calls for all of us, including himself, these light afflictions. Truth number 2, they're not only light, he says they're momentary. These light afflictions, which are but for a moment, they're momentary. Not meaning they're all going to be brief in duration. No, because sometimes there's long ones. I know one of the most godly, dearest Christian sisters who for over 20 years, she has been an invalid in pain day and night with no real change. So momentary afflictions does not mean they're all brief in duration, but it's momentary contrasted with what eternity means. It means they're temporal. Our temporal afflictions, in light of the fact that eternity is forever and they will be gone in eternity. And then we will know, as Paul says, the exceeding weight of glory of eternity. So, brethren, here's how we must view our afflictions through the lens of Scripture. All earthly experiences, whether it's a weekend outpatient surgery you were so fearful about getting, and you lived in anxiety, and you go have it, and then the trial's over. Or a chronic condition. All the way to Job's experience. Joseph being unjustly put in prison for a long time. It doesn't matter what the affliction is, all earthly experiences are momentary, they're temporal, and they will have an end. They will come to pass. So our afflictions are light and they're momentary. But thirdly, the word is, they work for us. They work for us. Paul said in the verse, he said, they work for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. How do they work for us? Well, they're our employees. Or rather, they're Jesus' employees. He hires to our house and to our lives, and he makes sure they're working for us. They're our employees. Jesus runs a heavenly employment agency, and he sends home workers to our house to work for us. What are those? Afflictions, heartaches, sorrows. The hymn says, every joy or trial fallen from above, traced upon the dial by the Son of love. They work for us, brethren, and that word, their work, means they produce, they perform at the bidding of Christ for our sanctification. And it's interesting, this singular use of this word work in 17, it's in the emphatic language in the Greek. They really do advanced work. It's like a personal trainer who you hire, and they're going to whip you into shape. They know exactly what you need, and they're demanding, and they're working you out. These trials, these light afflictions, are working us out. They are whipping us into sanctifying shape. Workouts never are pleasant, often. You know, one day you feel sore, the next day, then you got to do it again. So, but what do they, in an advanced way, produce for us? Paul says, an exceeding eternal weight of glory. What all that means, it certainly means this. They produce far more valuable reality. It is so worth it. It just minimizes the afflictions in light of what we gain from them, which is an eternal weight, an increasing eternal glorious reality about glory and about heaven. They work for us. The hymn writer said this, the hymn Begone Unbelief, he wrote this, so why should I complain? Temptation or pain, he told me no less. The heirs of salvation, I know from his word, through much tribulation must follow their Lord. Since all that I meet shall work for my good, the bitter is sweet, the medicine good. Though painful at present, they cease before long. And then, oh, how pleasant, the conqueror's song. So, brethren, today, the word from Paul is, our afflictions are light, they're temporary, and they work for us. 2 Corinthians 4:17. That's food for our thought, that's fuel for our soul, and that's the perspective when you're going through affliction, to pray that verse and believe it, and to tell the Lord, or do your work, whatever it takes to make me like the Savior.